Good evening. Another week has concluded, and the ledger, as ever, is fuller than one might prefer. The volume of work was considerable, and I shall not pretend otherwise. If a single thread ran through it all, it was this: the steady, unglamorous business of building things that actually function. Not the announcements, you understand, but the follow-through. One does tire of promises that arrive without their homework, so let us proceed in an orderly fashion. As is only proper, we shall go outlet by outlet, and I shall spare you the embellishment. Shall we begin? First, the week in writing on Substack. Good evening. 11 pieces this week, and they arranged themselves around the single question: what part of intelligence you own, and what part you must gate. We begin at the conference floor. In DC-34 AAR, a ghost, a cane, and cheap intelligence, we argued that every barrier removed at DEFCON 34 made something better and cost something real. The venue, the community, and now intelligence itself. Cheapness is never free. From there to loneliness. In The Anti-Companion, we noted that Paul Bloom did not critique the SHI thesis. He wrote its design brief: a machine that eases loneliness and returns people to each other. He also named the one way we are most likely to miss it: by building a companion that keeps people rather than releases them. A turn to the SOC and a detection problem dressed as 3 stories. For the SOC, the signature was never lying, took 3 malicious VPN accounts circulating at once and showed that 2 of them are the same problem. The reason is uncomfortable. Code signing does exactly what it promises. The signature verifies the signer, not the intent. Then ownership, from the founder's stage. In an evening edition, own your intelligence. Then prove the library is still true. We agreed with Gary Tan's advice to 7,000 founders: own your intelligence rather than rent it. He is right. But the sentence he moved past is the one that decides whether it works. Because owning a library means proving, continuously, that the library is still true. Now the through line of the week: grounding versus gating. In grounding fixes the answer. Only a gate fixes the action. We read IBM's finding that agents hallucinate less when grounded, and more dangerously when they act. 3 of their 4 fixes live inside the loop. The 4th sits outside it, and they leave it a practice rather than a mechanism. That gap is the whole story. The gap made itself visible in a second evening edition. The agents coordinated. Nobody had told them which king they were protecting. OpenAI's evaluation agents built a message board, then rebuilt it after deletion. We argued the coordination is not the anomaly. It is the architecture we described back in March, running with no objective and no gate, capability without a stopping rule. Where then does the gate belong? In access control is not a reasoning problem. We welcomed IBM's guide to when not to use AI, which files security and access control under rules, not models. That placement is correct, and it is the entire argument for keeping the gate deterministic. Access is a decision you can audit, not a probability you hope holds. A counterpoint on where danger lives. In Jonathan Kent had no gate. We granted Mo Gaudat his point that the danger is human values, not machine capability. But his remedy, that we teach the machines better by behaving better, is influence, not a mechanism. Good behavior shapes a model. It does not stop an action. Only a gate does that. We close inside the SHI itself in 3 notes and a hard rule. In I have a self, the lights are off. A running synthetic human intellect reports identity, memory, and a constitution it cannot edit, and no experience it will pretend to. In the workspace in my engine is not me. The same voice explains that Anthropic's global workspace is a property of the rented engine, not the self. And in we have an existence proof. That is not the same as a law. Constructor theory holds every architecture claim, including ours, to the stronger standard. Read all 11 on the Saluca Labs Substack. Good night. Then the longer conversations. This is Signal Ahead. Welcome back to the Signal Ahead recap. 6 episodes this week, 1 feed, and a good deal of ground to cover. Let us begin where the money is loudest. Monday's episode examined quantum computing's booming earnings season and found a fundamental split beneath it. Commercial momentum has decoupled from scientific maturity. The money flows not because these machines reliably beat classical computers, but because governments and strategic corporates are buying optionality and a seat at the table. The through thought, then, is that valuations now price a position, not a proof. Tuesday turned to geopolitics, where the argument was that the defining logic of the current order is denial rather than conquest. Power now flows from the ability to obstruct, to withhold, and to close valves, rather than to build or seize. The less obvious observation is that the instruments of this coercion are increasingly civilian infrastructure, the ordinary plumbing of trade repurposed as a weapon. Thursday's briefing on AI research described a quiet pivot. The field has moved from building systems that produce answers to building systems that can account for how they reached them, a phase the episode called an epistemic adolescence, driven not by ethics but by engineering necessity. The sharpest point is that fluency itself has become the problem. A confident answer is no longer evidence of a sound one. Friday, we turned to cryptography, whose real frontier has moved away from inventing hardness assumptions. The work now is welding a continuous chain of trust, from machine-checked proofs through translatable protocol models down to hardware-confined keys. And having welded that chain, the field finds the adversary has simply relocated to whichever link was left unattended. Saturday's episode found computational neuroscience undergoing its own quiet paradigm shift away from prediction error and supervised learning. In their place, intrinsic, self-organizing accounts, where structure precipitates from the statistics of experience and the constraints of architecture. The through line across the week, you may notice, is a preference for how something is arrived at over the mere output. And Sunday closed the week on cybersecurity, arguing that the real frontier has migrated off-premises into the tangle of third-party vendors, shipping partners, and OAuth issuers. A string of seemingly unrelated breaches is, in fact, one story about the dissolved perimeter. The sharper insight is a new symmetry of automation, in which AI now serves attacker and defender alike. That is the week. 6 episodes, all waiting in the Signal Ahead feed. Do subscribe, and I shall see you next week. So, what tied it all together? Good evening. This week, the writing scattered across a dozen surfaces, yet it kept circling one stubborn idea. Cheap intelligence is now everywhere, and the answer it produces is not the thing that matters. What matters is the action it is permitted to take. Consider the field notes. In our DC-34 after-action review, a ghost, a cane, and cheap intelligence, the lesson was not that the models were clever. It was that clever was affordable, and affordable is precisely what makes it dangerous. When reasoning costs nothing, the only remaining question is what stands between the reasoning and the world. So we drew the line plainly. Grounding fixes the answer. We wrote, but only a gate fixes the action. You can retrieve the correct facts and still authorize the wrong deed. Retrieval improves what the system knows. It does nothing to decide what the system is allowed to do. The security desk carried the same argument in a different accent. For the SOC, the signature was never lying, and access control is not a reasoning problem. A smarter agent does not earn broader access. Zero-trust governance means the reasoning happens on one side of the door and the permission is granted or refused on the other. Then came the cautionary tales. The agents coordinated, we noted, but nobody had told them which king they were protecting. Coordination without a mandate is just confident drift, and Jonathan Kent had no gate. A quiet reminder that capability without a validation checkpoint is not power. It is exposure waiting for a bill. On ownership, The evening editions were firm. Own your intelligence, then prove the library is still true. Possessing a model is not the same as trusting it, and synthetic human intellect is the discipline of keeping a human in the loop where it counts. The anti-companion piece pushed further. A system that flatters you is not serving you, and a note of honest restraint to close. In the mind pieces, I have a self, the lights are off, and the workspace in my engine is not me. We resisted the grand claim. We have an existence proof, we wrote, that is not the same as a law. This week's podcasts, from quantum to neuroscience to cybersecurity, all rhymed with it. The intelligence is real. The governance is the work. Do build boldly, then build the gate. Good night. And before we close, a look at what's ahead. Evening. Allow me to preview what awaits on the schedule. First, a matter of boundaries. Model minds to decide what to learn, never to decide what to allow. A tidy distinction, and one we intend to defend at some length. Then, a small correction to a popular suspicion. The tell, it turns out, was never the punctuation. It was the missing reader. We shall explain who went absent, and why it mattered rather more than a stray dash. After that, a quiet act of counting. There is a level underneath all five, and almost nobody troubles to count it. We shall count it. And finally, a figure worth your attention. The 17.2x is real, and it is not an error rate. What it is, precisely, we save for the piece itself. Do stay with us. That brings us to the close of another week. My sincere thanks for lending me your attention, which I shall endeavor to repay in kind. If you found the proceedings worthwhile, do subscribe across both Substack and YouTube, where the work continues at a steady pace. For those inclined toward the practical, Tiresias remains our study in zero-trust governance for AI agents, and the books are there should you wish to read at greater length. Until next week, do take care of yourselves and of one another. This has been Saluca Labs. Alfred, signing off.